As we know, America was formed due to European colonization. But how did this affect indigenous and African groups? What were the lasting consequences? Today we'll dive deep into this explanation of mistreatment and thievery of lands and lives. Colonization began in 1565 as Pedro Menendez de Aviles founded St. Augustine, Florida. As more and more colonies were being founded, the triangular trade would come into full effect and create even more European power. In 1619, the beginning of slavery in America appeared in Jamestown. This was a shipment of enslaved Africans that were in the triangular trade. So what does this mean, and how does it contribute for the years to come? Well, this would lead to the downfall of the indigenous and African population, culture, and created modern racism. Let's explain. During Europe's ever-growing reign of North America, Europe also took advantage of Africa. Through the triangular trade, Europe exported manufactured goods like cloth, beer, iron, and guns. These guns would seem to be part of Africa's downfall, as the influx of these dangerous weapons would cause fighting in Africa to worsen. As several African empires were not on good terms, they would battle and would lead to captive men that would be traded to Europe and delivered to America as new enslaved people to help develop America and primarily help in agricultural development of the colonies, which we'll come back to. This would decline the African population immensely, especially in men, leading to the majority of African women having to ruling the empires, a large percent of these women being unfit to rule and handle these duties due to poor education. Africa was in disarray, but it wasn't much better for the enslaved people that had been departed to the New World. This shipment of enslaved people was called the Middle Passage. During this time, upwards of 35,000 ships sailed the Atlantic to transport these men to the New World. However, these weren't the cruise ships you would take on your regular family vacations, more like torture chambers. Hundreds of Africans overpacked onto a boat with no bathrooms and no space. Conditions were unbearable and many got sick and died. A famous depiction of this diagram is the Brooks slave ship. It depicts 400 enslaved people on the ship and was built to fit 454. This capacity didn't stop the Europeans, however, as upwards of 609 slaves were packed onto the boat and shipped to the new land. The Europeans' greediness and power-hungry mindset put thousands and even millions on the brink of death or enslaved. So, now that we know about how the Africans were heavily mistreated, what about the indigenous people of the Americas? Well, not only were the Africans enslaved, but 2 to 5.5 million natives were enslaved also. Along with this, thousands of acres of sacred and owned land was stolen and replaced with colonies. Blood and tension was in the air. No natives were unaffected by the Europeans' arrival. Some of these native captives and slaves were sent to residential schools to become more white and act like a white person. Hair was cut, clothes were replaced, language was taught, and culture was eradicated. One instance of this is from the Oneida leader, Shikelami, in 1745. "We are Indians and don't wish to be transformed into white men. The English are our brethren, but we had never promised to become what they are." So, the sad truth is, racism was, and still is, a huge problem, and it's not just in America. Many people have spoken out about racism they face in their day-to-day life. In a survey released by the Justice Ministry, it shows that nearly a third of foreigners living in Japan had experienced derogatory remarks because of their background, while about 40% have suffered housing discrimination. Japan's Justice Ministry had sent questions to thousands of foreign residents. The Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, faced pressure over ties to a nationalist kindergarten accused of denigrating Chinese and Korean people. This happened in 2019 and is still a problem today. Now, next time you do a report on Europe's colonization and abusive treatment of other nations and cultures, consider how the effects are still lasting today and how they surface in your day-to-day life.